the legislature, that is Parliament. I think the whole of South Africa were in total shock and disbelief. But very shortly thereafter, the story changed dramatically, took an unexpected turn to become a case of arson. And no sooner had this finding been made, an arrest was very swiftly announced. And AZAPO is now saying that this is potentially the greatest conspiracy theory ever peddled in the history of this country's quasi-democracy. Please explain.
Well, look, thank you very much for that input. AZAPO's view is that what we have seen over a short period of time, we won't go even 2-3 years back, but allow us to go back to then say national key points and also the unrest in the country gave us a view that we've got a government that is unable to rule and govern this country, particularly in terms of security of the state. Now, we have seen the battlefield landing of the Gupta family. It's a national key point. There's been no consequence management there, even though the people are known. We have heard about the so-called 12th of the July unrest. They are known members of the ruling party, probably belonging to the two factions that are fighting each other in the ruling party. No consequence management, has not been arrested, they have not been charged. Interestingly, there is a poor black man who was arrested swiftly next to a national key point, which is Parliament. So we are saying for us, this issue of arresting Mr. Mafe, and they're coming up with all these things. Remember when it started, we were told that he is an operative from straight in Russia, he's been an undercover agent, and so all that kind of thing. Now the narrative is now changed, as we have heard even yesterday in the court, his appearance. So for us, this clearly shows that this democracy is not working for the rank and file, downtrodden people. That's why we call it a quasi-democracy, a democracy that is based on falsehood, a democracy that basically through this quasi and reactionary constitution that we have, that the world so loud, does not work for black people. Therefore, Mr. Mafe being tried, we are saying blackness is on fire. We are saying poverty is on fire, homelessness is on fire. And we are then saying as AZAPO, we need to stand up and defend Mr. Mafe, because Mr. Mafe is just a scapegoat. And how can it be? And let us invite the listeners of Salam Media to go with us on this one. How can it be that a member of society from a civilian works into a national key point, spends 2 hours, allegedly burns the place must catch a blaze, and then after that comes out and speaks in front of you, that's going to be arrested? This does not make sense. This is what we mean by conspiracy theories that are peddled in the history of this quasi-democracy, because they had now to basically find an excuse. They had to find something credible as a state. So what do? They pounce on an innocent, in our view as AZAPO, an innocent member of society. We are saying that there is a judicial commission of inquiry to investigate all this. Because, for instance, the people that manned the camera, where were they? Where were the security in the precincts, right? What happened to the people that must be patrolling the environs of the building of Parliament? What happened to the fire alarm? What happened to the burglary alarm of Parliament? What happened to the sprinklers? Right? All those kinds of things get into question. So that's why we are saying these are conspiracy theories. How can it be that a national key point can be accessed with such things? So that's where AZAPO is coming from.
Okay, you also go on to say that, and it's a very valid point that AZAPO raises as well, and that is that out of the blue, a few days after the fire, or just very shortly after the fire, an unnamed architect, has worked out the costs of how much it's going to cost taxpayers in repairing the damages to the burnt building. The amount that's being bandied about at the moment is 1 billion rands. AZAPO says it's a joke, and this is another well-calculated plan and attempt at looting state coffers.
Exactly that. I mean, we could not have put it more succinct than we did. We have seen that there is an orchestrated, well-calculated, well-structured, well-planned modus operandi of basically looting state resources by this particular party, their members, this party called the ANC, that is in government. Their president, I don't know whether members of, rather the viewers and the listeners of Salam Media have got hint of a particular so-called leaked audio by the president of the ANC and the president of the country, where he blatantly, allegedly says that it's attributed to him and he has never disputed it, to then say that he knows that to the run-up to the Nazareth conference, members of his party who ran against with him, his competitors, used state resources, used state money to basically fund their own campaign. Now, we are then saying here, and remember we issued the statement on the 1st of January. Now, we are saying there was that came up from the newspaper. Now, all of a sudden, how can the architect know how much it will cost when the investigation has not even started, right, to declare, because that will become a so-called crime scene. Now, there must be forensic investigations and so on. But before all that happens, boom, in the news, that's what we get. That an architect has already estimated the cost at 1 billion rand. Now, it can only happen in a banana republic. It can only happen in an organization that basically is stealing state resources. Craft is actually normalized, right? And AZAPO says that society must know and society must see the ruling party for what it is. It's an organization that doesn't care for the welfare of this country and its citizens. It's a country that says, let us eat as much as we can. Let us line our pockets as much as we can, so that if the other faction comes, we have lined up our pockets. And this happens at the expense of citizens of this country and also at the security of this particular country. We are saying, why are the people that man the cameras? Why are the people that are in charge of the security people? Why are the people that are at the helm of all parliament and how things work there? Why are they not being charged? Because that is actually what should be the issue. Those are the people on trial, not Mr. Mafe.
It has since been established in a latest media release that sadly Mr. Mafe has been confirmed suffering from a mental health condition called schizophrenia. So there's that added situation as well. Maybe the defense or the prosecution would use that issue in the case to suggest that he is in fact the perpetrator, even though AZAPO is saying that he is the victim, he's been used in this situation. So it's going to be interesting how all of this plays out. But obviously, AZAPO believes that Mr. Mafe is victimized because of his blackness. And Mr. Mafe is notably one of the countless, sadly, one of the countless victims of the ANC corrupt housing provision practices, suggesting, and I think we all know this, it is in fact a fact rather than a suggestion, that we have countless of homeless people in the country. And AZAPO goes on to say that Mr. Mafe is a victim of, now you bring in the DA's hostile policies towards the poor and homeless people living in Cape Town, and I should imagine the rest of the country. How do you respond to all of that?
Yeah, well, look, firstly, AZAPO needs to say the issue that you raised of mental health. In our statement that we have just read out elaborately, we are indicating somewhere in the middle that as AZAPO, we emphatically reject the charges that are against him, but we say Mr. Mafe, these charges that he faces emanate from what AZAPO describes as the four cardinal sins, right, in this neo-colonial South Africa. Now, firstly, Mr. Mafe is facing what he's facing because he's black. He's facing what he's facing as a vulnerable person who is homeless. He's also facing this because he's poor. And then AZAPO makes a very important last point. And AZAPO, you see, is always has foresight in these things. He said, being challenged with mental health issues, albeit officially unconfirmed. Now, that's what we said as AZAPO. We are then saying, all of a sudden, the state now alleges that Mr. Mafe was observed and the youth defense team didn't know about it. And that there's a report then that says he got paranoid schizophrenia. Now, for us, that is hogwash of the highest order. Because we then make a corollary. We said, when you go years back into that colonial building called the Parliament of South Africa, that building in Plain Street, we are saying when the fund stabbed for Burti to death, despite the fact that he was caught in the act, and Mr. Mafe was not caught in the act, the state still needs to leave evidence to that effect. All right? So Sanders, when he appeared, his first appearance, he was offered to be observed for mental health challenges. That did not happen with Mr. Mafe. He was traumatized. He had to take AZAPO and other organizations of black people to write statements like this, to go like we did yesterday, to demonstrate and indicate maximum support from Mr. Mafe. All of a sudden, there is a somersault now by the state because they realize that there is a backlash against them. Because indeed, this proves that the state is catching what all is wrong. It proves indeed that Mr. Mafe is being used as a scapegoat because the state doesn't have a case. Now, all of a sudden, Mr. Mafe is charged now with what we call terrorism-related act. The first time in the history of the so-called, that's why we call it a quasi-democracy. The first time a person gets charged for terrorism, that becomes a black person under democratic South Africa. Now, let me get to the issue that you raised about the problems of the housing policies of the ANC and also the DA. Now, it's clear that when you are a black person in this quasi-democratic South Africa, led by the corrupt ANC, we all know that the housing project that they've been dealing with, the so-called RDP houses, how they get allocated and so on, patronage is at the center. And people get allocated houses in terms of who you know, nepotism, who you are related to, etc., and how deep you are in the pockets of those that are in power within the ANC at a national level. But at a provincial level, the DA, right, through its City of Cape Town personnel, the city police and others, they have unleashed venom and they have unleashed rest upon the homeless people in this particular city of Cape Town. For instance, they have been harassing them for a number of things, right? So the policies of the DA are not healthy. The DA, just like the ANC, they've got anti-black and anti-poor policies. Policies that don't worry and don't care about the welfare of in this country.
All right, I hear you loudly and clearly. What do you as a AZAPO believe should be happening with this issue of homeless people? Do you think perhaps land expropriation without compensation could be one of the answers? And here I'm targeting particularly abandoned buildings in city centre, in the CBDs, abandoned buildings and unused buildings. Do you think that might be the answer? And how much of weight would AZAPO put behind such a call to house homeless people?
Well, as an AZAPO government, firstly, what an AZAPO government will do is not to expropriate land, whether with or without compensation. So as we see that there's a reactionary notion, it doesn't take us anywhere. We will repossess the land. And as a government, as the state, we will now then hold that land in trust of the citizen and dispense of it according to the needs of society. Now, one of the needs will be the issue of housing, how you utilize land for housing. And you are correct. There is all this, what we not only with empty unused buildings, but we also have the what we call absent land laws that are there. Now, once we repossess that land as an AZAPO government, we will have, now what AZAPO does, and in our manifestos in the past, we talked about having to have a state company that will be able to run and assist us in terms of this issue of the provision of housing in a well-planned, a well-structured, and try to restructure this apartheid spatial arrangement that we find. This concept of the so-called dehumanizing and demeaning so-called RDP housing was going to take that nonsensical outlook of housing and throw it where it belongs in the dustbin. And through that company that we talk about, be able to build decent housing for Black people, houses that actually will uplift the dignity of Black people as members of the human rights. That would be what we'll do as an AZAPO.
Okay, my final question then to you would be, I raised the issue regarding land expropriation without compensation. You respond by saying you'd rather go the repossession route. What's the difference? How do you see the difference? Expropriation versus repossession.
Yeah, well, it's like night and day. You see, when
Semantics.
You expropriate, yeah, exactly. When you expropriate, you presuppose that you are taking from someone something that belongs to them, and then that person can litigate against you.
Okay.
So it's legalistic. You expropriate, you are taking away something from someone that person owns. Now, when you repossess, you are taking what has been stolen, what someone possesses unlawfully. Now, in this country, the history of this country is there has been what we call land dispossession. The indigenous people of this country have been dispossessed through the barrel of the gun and coercion. Our chiefs, our kings died. They were killed when they resisted this particular land invasion, right? So once we say we repossess as a democratic state of socialist Azania, as an AZAPO government, we will now then take that land. So there will be no litigation because now the state becomes the custodian of the land. Who will now hold the land in trust on behalf of the citizens of the country. And once it comes to administration of the land, right, we will then be able to administer it properly because then there'll be all these needs. There'll be your housing, your agriculture, there'll be your mining and so on and whatever. That's why you see when things like things stand now, this apartheid, because it's what we call a quasi-democracy, because it favors the owners of capital. For instance, the mines are not owned by the state, right? It's still in private hands, right? The economy, as a consequence of that, is in private hands, and we say there is a democracy. So once you speak about this expropriation, by the way, as AZAPO, we made our submission 3 years back to that committee that was there, and we indicated to them that expropriation is a misnomer. It doesn't take us nowhere. We should be talking about repossession so that the state can become the custodian of the land and hold it in trust of the citizens of this country and dispense of the land in an equitable way to make sure that the economy of this country develops. So that would be, as you call it, to borrow from me, that would be the semantic difference between the two.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for explaining that so succinctly. And I know I digress there, but it was an important issue because we're talking about homeless people like Mr. Mafe falling victims in the hands of manipulators. To wrap up then, just very quickly, your thoughts on these acts of sabotage all around the country and your final thoughts. And I think this is a question I will always ask different political leaders and people who obviously represent parties such as AZAPO. Your thoughts on the July insurrection?
Thank you very much. I think the questions that you raise actually are cutting at the nerve of this whole thing. As AZAPO, basically, we are saying that this whole problem that we have in this country is because of a ruling party that has allowed its own internal shenanigans to flow out into society. It's an organization that has been exposed that as much as it claims that it's the leader of society, in fact, the contrary has been proven. We are now then saying the ruling party has basically, what we see happen is basically to indicate that they have enrooted the culture of corruption, doing things that are out of the book, things that are unethical, doing them with absolute alacrity. And we are saying as a the ruling ANC must be stopped in their tracks. Let us come to the July unrest. Now, before the July unrest, you remember some 2 years back, there was what I would term, for lack of a better expression, the Mahikeng unrest.
Right.
Where the then premier, Mahuma Pilo, people wanted to get rid of him and I'm sure the viewers and listeners of Salam remember, and that you remember that as well. Now,
okay, unfortunately, I'm gonna have to rush you here. We have run out of time. I know I've asked you some questions that need some deep thinking and lots of very deep and lengthy answers. Can I just stop you there and perhaps invite you again on the show at another time? Can you just wrap up by giving me a short answer to that question that I posed?
Okay, the July unrest one. We have gotten contradictory information. The then Minister of Defense said it was counter-revolutionary act of criminality. The President said it was insurrection. Up until today, we don't know as a society what is it. Secondly, we were told that there were 12 suspects called
the dirty dozen. The dirty dozen.
Exactly. Yeah. Where are they? They have not been charged. They have not been arrested. But Mr. Mafe has been given as a scapegoat and a foreman has just been arrested. So for us, we see a contradiction. So that's basically what they're saying. We've got a government and a president that doesn't know what he's doing and they can't rule. So the ANC must definitely just do the honorable thing and just step back. Or in 2024, we are going to make sure that through the voters, that they must vote them out and they give us a chance to rule this country.
Okay, that was absolutely, it was wonderful chatting to you. You've truly raised issues. You've given us a different perspective on some of the burning issues here in the country. I do look forward to having future discussions with you, Mr. Nodoba, spokesperson, national spokesperson of the Azanian People's Organization. I thank you for your time and your insights. Go well.
No, thank you very much. Shukran.
Assalamu alaikum. It is 8:52 a.m. News and Views right here on Salam Media.
Babu, why don't you loosen your belt a bit more?
But why now?
Well, it's